So baseball, I must confess, as a child, there's certain sports that kids fall in love with first. And a lot of kids these days, they'll fall in love with soccer, and there are kids here who have played soccer as their first sport. But baseball, for me, when I was a kid, we lived in a house and has anyone ever seen the movie The Sandlot? So right next door to where I lived in the city, there was a house that was torn down, and now it had become a sandlot, which us kids, we turned into our makeshift baseball field. And sometimes we had a real bat and a real ball, and other times we had a stick that didn't look much different than this. And we were hitting tennis balls with what was a sawed-off end of a mop or a broom or something, because we were in the city and that was kind of the thing that you did back then. But I remember playing baseball and loving baseball, and I loved it because I was good at it. And I was really excited. Our family had moved to West Virginia, and where our house was right next to my elementary school, which had an awesome baseball field. The little league fields that are perfectly groomed, and you see them and you're like, wow, I wish we had one of those. It was right next to my house. And that summer I signed up to play Little League because baseball was my first love, and I wanted to be a part of this. And I discovered something. I wasn't very good. In fact, I think I was the most horrible Little League player of all time. All time, I was really, really bad. Don talked about. Let me tell you how bad it was. My older brother, he's like 9 years older than me. One of his best friends was one of the coaches within the league, and guess who didn't get picked to go on Bucky's team? When you can't even get selected to go on your brother's friend's team, you were one of the last ones selected. And I was really terrible. And as a matter of fact, I believe, if I remember right, that my batting average for the year by the time it was done was 0.00. Perfect. I was like the Lions or the Cleveland Browns of baseball. But so I would get up to bat, and I remember when I was in the sandlot next to me, the pitch would come, and I'd hit the ball, and it would go. And sometimes in practice, when I would allow my coach to pitch it exactly where I wanted to swing, I would swing, and bang, that ball would go in the outfield and hit the back fence. And it was a big field for a Little League. But during the game, it was like pop, pop. But the pop I was hearing was the pop of the mitt behind me as I fanned at every single pitch that was thrown. Now, some of it was that I stunk. Some of it was that the competition had risen to a different level than the kids in my neighborhood. There was this kid in Little League. I don't know if you guys ever remember when you were in 3rd or 4th grade, that 5th grader who was just, are you kidding me? How can this kid be in my school? That kid's name in my school, I don't remember anybody else's names hardly, but I remember Brad Bell's name. Because Brad Bell was about 6 feet tall in 5th grade and threw in the 80s. And threw a curveball that looked like it was coming at your head before it landed in for a strike. Ridiculous. I expected to see him in the major leagues. I never did. I don't know what happened to Brad, but he was amazing at that age. But it was impossible for me to hit off of him. And I found myself being called out all the time. And there was something worse. If there was one thing worse than not being able to get a hit, my favorite play while I was up to bat was called hit by pitch. Because at least I didn't make an out. At least I wasn't being called out. And my worst one was I was in the batter's box, and there was a pitch that was a curveball that those curveballs, they look like they're coming at you, and I was expecting it to break, and it didn't, and I stopped right here. But when I stopped, I froze, which seemed like an eternity. and all three umpires gathered together and they were trying to figure out, well, we know the ball plunked him in the leg. Do we give him first base because he got hit by the pitch, or do we call him out because he swung at a pitch that hit him in the thigh? This is how bad I was. But they called me out. So I've been hit by a pitch and called out on the same play. I don't recommend it. But here's what I discovered later in life. When I was first grade, second grade, third grade, I never really noticed this problem that I had. But the problem is that my eyes, I have an astigmatism. Anybody know what astigmatism is? It means that your eyes are shaped like footballs, and that gets worse and worse as you get older. But I wasn't in one of those families that took their children to the eye doctor every year, whether they needed it or not. And I had this ability to squint, and I could pass eye tests, but that doesn't really work very well when you're squinting and playing baseball. But I figured out a workaround because I didn't want to wear glasses, and I didn't think I needed glasses because I could squint and get by. But the fact was that I needed glasses. Later in life, I thought it was an amazing epiphany. It made me feel a lot better about myself when, as an adult, I finally had friends who talked me into saying that, do you know you're blind? Do you know we're afraid to drive in a car with you because you don't see half of the things that do you know that you walk into things when you're because you can't see? And I'm like, I can see just perfect. And finally I went to the eye doctor and found out my eyes were actually pretty bad, but it made me feel better about myself. Oh wait, this is how bad I was. My dad came to visit us, and I had a game day that day, and I pretended I was sick because I didn't want my dad to see me play baseball. But I found once I got glasses, I actually became a pretty good hitter. I was playing softball with some friends of mine in a league and actually was one of the better players, and it was almost astonishing to go from that horrible to that good of a hitter with just one thing. But what was happening was I was being called out because I couldn't see. And I think that we work like that in life, right? Don't we miss connections sometimes? God's calling us to this home plate where we will connect with God, and we miss and we fail to see. What's happening in this home run life is we're learning that God has a pattern for living in a certain way that we've got to go about life, or we're going to find ourselves being called out over and over again and not knowing why. And when I look at these bases, this home plate here is connection, first base is character, second base is community, and third base is competence. And there is a pattern for living God's way that is not the same pattern as the world. In fact, God's power drives us home according to God's pattern. Say that with me. God's power drives us home according to God's pattern. So what happens when we find ourselves running the base the wrong way? I'll tell you what happens is we live like everybody else in the world. Everybody else in the world who isn't looking to have God's power in their lives will go to this base most often, competence. I want to be successful. I want to be good at whatever it is that I do. And they run from home to third and circle around, and they run back home and they think they scored. Or possibly there's another generation, a lot of people in the millennial their way of scoring is if their relationships. If the relationships are good, and they'll run from home to second and run around the base and score and call it a score. Back and forth, second to home. And Sometimes, maybe you're an older generation in this character base and you find yourself hitting this character base very well. Maybe you have a very religious relationship with God, but you kind of strike out sometimes when it comes to competence or when it comes to others, but you run back and forth and you think that you score, but you don't score because the only way to score is God's power drives us home according to God's pattern. Now, the question you might be asking is this in the Bible? Where is this in the Bible? My favorite book or letter that's in the Bible is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote called Romans. Romans has been the defining chapter of my life. There are many verses in Romans that are my life verses, and as a worship pastor, Romans 12:1 and 2 was even the defining verse of my entire team for 10 years. This was the verse we founded everything that we were doing on. And we'll read it together. This is out of the NIV version. This is Romans 12:1. Let's read out loud. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And then verse 2, and do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So do not conform to the pattern of this world. So what's the problem when we conform to the pattern of this world? What does that look like? If we base our whole life upon our success, our money, or even our relationships, I'll tell you what happens is if we skip this first base and we try to live from here, it'll end up messing up all of our relationships. It'll mess up our relationships because people become, instead of the relationship being about what I can be for them, it becomes what everybody can be for me. Like we become like Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? Right? What have you done for me lately? What are you doing for me? And when we run these, there's only one place that you can run the bases wrong and not be called out, and it's T-ball. So we've all seen the videos, or maybe we've even been the little kid who hits the ball in T-ball and doesn't know where to go and just kind of runs around, and eventually you walk them over to first and you help them figure it out. And that's a lot of what we do over in our Connect ministry is it's T-ball. We let the kids play, we let them have fun, and then we teach them a little bit about God because that's about all they can handle at those tender young ages. And as they grow and learn, we raise them up more to grow leaders who love God and love people because we don't want to see them be called out. And there is a pattern to life. As a matter of fact, there are 4 different patterns of life. And we're going to talk a little bit about those 4 patterns of life. And as we talk about them, I want you to think about how you are, how you live, be real with yourself, be real with God, and let's talk about these patterns. And the thing that I found is sometimes I've been a little bit of every one of these patterns. But the first one is number 1 is our power plus our purpose. Say that out loud with me. Our power plus our purpose. Now, I don't want to tell you that no one can ever get anything done driving by their own power and their own purpose, because I'd be lying. There are billionaires, there are professional athletes, there are some of the people that you know who are the most successful people around. And they are driven by their own power, for their own purpose. And from everyone on the outside, it looks like, hey, they're succeeding. Hey, that's what I want to be. Oh, if I could only be like them. But as I think about people who live by their own power and their own purpose, I know what they're feeling because I've been there before. living by my own power and my own purpose. And I read this quote, and many of you may have heard this quote by this guy named Blaise Pascal. It says, "There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known through Jesus." This life, by our own power and our own purpose, ultimately leads us to the empty life. We keep trying to fill it. More money, more stuff, more whatever it is that we're trying to live for, and we still end up feeling empty. More never fills the hole because it's a God-shaped hole. And no stuff can fill it. No people can fill it. No person can be God for you. As much as some people want to look to a relationship and if I could only get that person, or if I could only get that person to behave this way, then I wouldn't feel so empty, then I wouldn't feel so lost. But no person can ever be God for you. And then there's type 2. Let's read this one out loud. Our purpose plus God's power. Our purpose plus God's power. And as I look around a church, typical people, most of the people that you know who are God-fearing, God-loving people, isn't this how we live? Hey, God, I got this plan. Will you bless it? Hey, God, I'd like to do this. Will you bless it? God, bless this. God, bless that. God, do this for me. God, do that for me. God, be there for me. God. And our prayers are very much asking God to bless our purpose. Our life is very much designed for God to bless our purpose. And instead of following God, we ask God to follow me. Let's read that out loud. Instead of following God, we ask God to follow me. Anyone ever been there? Anyone been there this week? Yeah. We're all there a lot. It's easy to live there because it gets harder as you go through, but we're going to read on this. But our purpose plus God's power ends up being an unfulfilled life, doesn't it? Because God suddenly exists for our purposes, and we end up creating a God for our own part-time private use. And we're going to end up unfulfilled because we're really bad at being God, because we lack the power to be God. And then the third one is, let's read this out loud, God's purpose plus our power. God's purpose plus our power. Now, this one is, I've been this guy a lot. Has anyone ever really, I wrote it out like this. I know what God wants me to do, but lack the power to do it. I know what God wants me to do, but I lack the power to do it. It's just like what Paul said in Romans 7 when he says, that thing that I want to do, I don't do, but that thing that I don't want to do, that's the very thing I do. Has anyone ever felt like that? You're trying to overcome something, you're trying to get past something, you're trying to make something work, but it's no matter what you do, it's like you lack the power. You lack the power to fulfill it, and what happens is when we have God's purpose and our own power, it becomes a frustrating life because, again, we're really bad at being God. We lack the power. And then the fourth one, let's read this one. It's God's purpose plus God's power. Let's read that again. God's purpose plus God's power. Anybody notice what's missing? Amen. You guys are good. You're quick students. You all get the star on your head on the way out. Hook them up on the way out, Mary, okay? They get the star on their head. So God's purpose plus God's power means I'm missing. That means we've made connection at the plate, and we're actually rounding the bases the way God intended because we made connection. And what I call that is God's purpose plus God's power equals the full life, and it's also known as a home run life. So if you want to know how to live that home run life, it's by doing God's purpose for your life. Did you know God has a purpose for each and every one of us? That God has a real purpose for each and every one of us. God has a real something that we're supposed to be doing. There's actually a life that you can live, that God will be the wind in your sails to help you accomplish it because you're living according to His purpose by His power. You're not trying to do it on your own. It's, anyone else? So I have a high school senior who graduated, and when kids get that age, they have this phrase that I hate. It's called, I know. I know. You tell them what to do. You tell them you need to do this and this and this. And they're like, I know, I know, I know, I know. And then they get frustrated with you because, they still don't do it. So you still tell them they need to. And you can fill in the blank. I don't know the problems that you've had with your children. Maybe it's to get their room clean. Maybe it's to get them to fill out job applications. Maybe it's. But the answer is, I know, I know, I know. And we live like that with God a lot. When we try to go to that base about character and we're like, well, I know what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to love God and love people and community. I know I'm supposed to love others, and I know I'm supposed to work with excellence. And we're telling God, I know. But all the time, God's like, yeah, but you haven't made connection yet. You haven't spent the time with me to be empowered by me, to have the character that you need, to be the fit that you need to be in community to make a difference for me, that you would have the competence that would change the world. You haven't connected with me. But all the time we're going around these bases talking to God like, oh, I know, I've got this figured out. I know. But the only way to live a full life is to be real with yourself, be real with God, then live connected and stay connected to God. Do you understand that we need to be real with ourselves? Does anybody understand what being real with yourself is? It's when you acknowledge to yourself and you say, hey, self, I've been being called out a lot. I haven't been everything I've needed to be with character. I've been getting thrown out over and over and over again. And self, yeah, you may have a few good relationships, but God's calling you to go deeper and further with more people. Hey, self, you might be able to fool everybody out there and make them think that you're the best around. But God knows you've got more in you. If you'd only make connection. See, just like me in Little League, if I tried to swing and miss and run the bases, I'm not fooling anybody. Everybody knows I've been called out, right? And I get to go sit on the bench. The good news is if that's you, one of the things I love about baseball is even when we're called out, what do we get to do a couple innings later? Get to go back up to bat. And when this game's over, you get another game. And over and over and over again, you get a chance to come and make connection and run the bases according to God's pattern. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Worship is how you come to this plate. And there are many avenues of worship. We began this service singing some songs of worship. We're reading the Bible. You're at a church service. These are things we do as acts of worship. But it's easy to be a spectator in this sport of life. You come and you watch what other people are doing, but not putting yourself in the game. And where the rubber meets the road is after that hour on Sunday morning. How are you applying it and making it real to your life? How are you connecting to God Monday through Saturday? How are you making this relationship real? How are you presenting your body to Him as a living sacrifice so that you make sure that you make connection at the plate, so that you're not running the bases and looking like a T-baller in life in the realms of the Spirit and from the eyes of heaven, from the eyes of God. Because that's what the world's doing. That's why Paul said, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. God's power drives us home by God's pattern. And if you're skipping any bases, have you ever watched a baseball game and maybe one of my favorite players growing up, his name was Kirk Gibson. And I became a Tigers fan in 1984, which if anybody knows, it was a really magical year. But Kirk Gibson came up to bat and it was the bottom of the ninth inning and, well, he bats left-handed. And he hit a home run. And the home run was the winning home run to win the game. And yet, he hit this home run and it goes over the fence. And what does Kirk Gibson do? Okay, you guys don't know who Kirk Gibson is. Jim Thome. Do you guys know him? Okay, Jim Thome is my favorite Cleveland Indian ever. Why is he my favorite Cleveland Indian ever? Because he was a big dude who could stroke some home runs. And every time Jim Thome hit a home run, what did he do? Even if it was the bottom of the ninth and that home run ended the game, what did he do? He ran the bases, right? He ran the bases. Why did he run the bases? That home run won the game when it went over the fence, didn't it? It doesn't win until you round all the bases and score. And it's the same thing with God. You can have an intimate time with God in the morning. And you walk out of your house and you compromise your character because somebody cuts you off in traffic, or somebody shows up late for work or doesn't show up at all, or whatever it is that knocks you off of your base. You can lose out on community. You can have this intimate time with God, but not run these bases according to God's pattern. And just like the person who hits a home run, if they don't run around the bases, they get called out. You have to live according to this pattern. And also, we can't run, if Jim Thome hits the home run and runs and touches third before he touches first, what has Jim Thome done? He's just the opposite of me. Remember, I got hit by a pitch, but got called out. He would have hit a home run, yet was called out on a home run. It's actually happened in games when the people get mobbed and the umpires get whatever. I'm going to leave it alone because, but it's really happened that the person who hit the home run gets called out. So you got to live life. God's power drives us home by God's pattern. And we learned this last week, and this is one of the toughest things in spiritual life. I almost have the video done to post for last week, but I've got to render it and get it up. Hopefully it'll be there by tomorrow evening. But God is true to His promises, but not our timetable or our game plan. Anybody ever found that one out? That things happen differently than you thought, and they don't happen as quickly as you wanted. And so what happens is when it seems like God's slow. Anyone else ever feel like God's slow? Yeah, we feel like that a lot, don't we? You know, you name it. I don't have to go there, but when it seems like God's slow, we tend to try to cut corners. And if we run around the base and we think, this is moving too slow, I'm just going to kind of skip a base. I know what character says I'm supposed to do, but no one's ever going to know. No one's ever going to know that I didn't touch first or that I skimmed over first. Nobody's going to know. And we end up being called out because we're trying to cut corners. And when I think of cutting corners, we've been studying this whole home run life is based upon the life of Joseph. But Joseph had a dad. Sometimes you can tell something about one person by looking at their parents. Sometimes you can. Some of us struggle and fight to try to not be like our parents. Don't we all in some way? Yeah. And don't we want our kids to be better than we were? Yeah. But we're going to look at the life of Jacob, which is Joseph's dad. And Joseph is a guy, Jacob was a guy who was a third base liver. He just done this whole go from third to home, third to home, third to home, third to home, look like you're scoring. As a matter of fact, the name Jacob means trickster. When my son Ben was born, my wife and I had whittled down these two names. Are we going to name him Ben or Jacob? And because he was my son, and I know of my tendency to be a corner cutter. I have a tendency to be a corner cutter. I want to make it as easy as possible, get there as quick as possible, go as fast as possible. And Jacob was very much the same way, but his name was Jacob, which means trickster. One thing you want to know about the Bible is we see the translated thing, my name is John. If you were to meet somebody who was Hebrew and their name was John, you would walk around calling him, "Hey, gift of God, how you doing today?" Because John means gift of God. So everywhere Jacob went, when someone said hi, they said, "Hi, trickster, hi, trickster, hi, trickster, hi, trickster." Because it was the literal meaning of his name. That word means something. The name Jesus means Savior. Every time I say the word Jesus, my Savior shows up. I need my Savior. Because that name, there's power in that name. Only his name can save. But that name, Jacob, means trickster. Have you ever known a Jacob who was a little bit of a trickster? I've known one or two. Funny how that works, isn't it? Someone lives up to their name, and Jacob was one who definitely lived up to his name. Even from the very way that he was born. He was the second child, but he tried to make sure that he came out first. He cheated his brother out of his birthright. His brother was hungry, so he ended up figuring out how to trick him into selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. Then he tricked his father into giving the blessing that belonged to his brother Esau by disguising himself as Esau. His father was old and losing sight. And his father told Esau, he said, "Son, I don't know what day I'm going to die, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to go into the woods and kill my favorite wild animal and make me some of that soup that I love. And when you come, we'll eat the soup together and I'll give you the blessing that belongs to the firstborn." So while Esau is out in the woods hunting this animal, he ends up preparing this soup along with his mom, who was a co-conspirator. But I don't want to get into all of that right now. But they end up putting hair on his arms and trying to make him smell like Esau. And he comes into the room where his father Isaac is, and Jacob tricks his dad into thinking that he is Esau. And suddenly he prays this prayer of blessing over Jacob that belongs to Esau. And then Esau's really mad at Jacob, and he just stole his inheritance. What kind of person steals someone's inheritance? Come on. This meant that he had the lion's share of all the blessings from God and all the lion's share of the stuff that God had blessed them with. It didn't mean that Esau was going to get nothing. It just meant Jacob was going to get a lot more. But that's what he was. He was a trickster. And when Esau was seeking to kill him, he decides he's going to run. He's going to run. You see, he missed this base of character, and he missed this base of community. He'd done wrong, and he alienated his whole family and caused a big, all in the name of trying to be successful. And he ends up running for his life. But along the way, God meets him. Isn't it a crazy thing? Even when we messed up, God gives us another at bat. Even when we've been called out, God gives us another bat. And we're going to pick up the text in the 28th chapter of the book of Genesis. It says, at sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stop there for the night. And Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. And as he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to heaven. And he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. Anybody ever heard of Jacob's ladder? This is the verse. And at the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you, and I am giving it to you and your descendants. And I want you to understand what's happening. Jacob is in the very place where God made the same promise to Abraham. And your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. And they will spread out in all directions to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. And what's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. And one day I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised. That's a big, cool promise from God, isn't it? What would your response be if God showed up to you and he said to you this evening while you're sleeping, very similar promise, and he said, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to multiply your descendants. They're going to be more than the dust. I'm going to be with you everywhere you go. No matter, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to be there. What would your response be? What is our response? What would it be? Would you say, yeah, God, I'm going to follow you? Let's take a look at what Jacob's response was. Jacob's response isn't too different than what most of us respond to God's promises. Let's read this out loud. Then Jacob made this vow. If God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. Wow. Wow. Have you ever been in an if and then relationship? This is what he proposes to God. If you do this, then. If, then. Nobody wants to be an if and then relationship, do you? Let's get this. If you do everything I say, then I'll be your friend. Anyone ever have any of those kind of kids growing up? If you play what I want to play, then we can be friends. But if you want to do what you want to, then I'm not going to do that. So he gives one of these playground bully proposals to the creator of the universe. Okay, fine. I'll let you be my God if you do everything I want. Lots of us have gotten in trouble there, haven't we? The area around this country is full of people who no longer believe in God because they wanted to have an if and then relationship. God, if you make this girl say yes when I ask her out, then I'll know that you're God. But she don't want nothing to do with you. And God's not going to control people. It's just outside of who he is. Or, God, if you'll give me this job, then I'll follow you. And how many times of the if-thens have we failed? God, if you give me this promotion, then I'll start giving you more at church. It's easier to keep spending it, isn't it? Seems like the bills never end. God, if and then, if and then, if and then. What does that sound like? Remember we looked at the different lives? You remember the one that said, our purpose, God's power. Our purpose, God's power. See, Jacob gets this connection with God, but still wants to live in a pattern that doesn't equal God's way of living. And I want to know where you find yourself. Are you an our power, our purpose, empty life kind of person? Are you an our purpose, God's power, unfulfilled life kind of person? Are you a God's purpose, our power, frustrated life person? A God's purpose, God's power, full life kind of purpose. And if you want to know where you are on that scale, I just want to be like it would be when you go into a psychiatrist's office. What do they say? And how do you feel? And how does that make you feel? Tell me what you're feeling. And that'll tell you how you're living. Making that connection with God. We need to be like Jacob, and Jacob didn't learn it yet, and he ended up going to his uncle Laban's house, and he met one trickster who was worse than him. His uncle Laban, he meets his uncle Laban's daughter, and back then marrying cousins was not frowned upon. But he met his cousin Rachel, who he found beautiful, and he agrees. He says, I'll work for you, Laban, for 7 years if you'll just give me your daughter's hand in marriage. And there's this beautiful verse in the Bible that says, and those 7 years seemed like mere days because of Jacob's love for Rachel. Isn't that beautiful? So the wedding night, Laban gets Jacob drunk and gives the older, less attractive daughter to him. And he thought he was consummating the marriage with Rachel and woke up with Leah. And when he woke up, the trickster had been tricked. And Jacob's like, Laban, what have you done to me? And Laban says, no problem, just work for me for another 7 years. And you can have both of them. It's all worked out. And so, again, he finishes that 7 years, and then Laban tricks him again with they keep tricking each other back and forth, trying to figure out who's going to get ahead, but nothing's ever happening, and he ends up having to sneak away in the middle of the night to go back to his father's house. But there's a problem with going back to his father's house. Do you remember why he left his father's house? Esau wanted to kill him. And it's more than 20 years later, but is there any doubt that his brother still wants to kill him for stealing his birthright, for stealing his inheritance, for trying to trick him out of everything that God wanted to give to Esau? And while he's on his way back, he finds out that his brother's coming toward him with 400 men. And he's there with all of his children and all of his wives and all of his possessions, and he's wondering, is his brother going to kill him? And he needs an encounter with God. He needs a connection with God. Have you ever been to the spot where everything's falling apart and you're like, God, I need to see you now. God, I need you now. God, if I ever needed you, Lord, it's now. And God shows up. Jacob sends his family over, and this left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. Now, theologians will tell you that this man that came to wrestle with Jacob was none other than a pre-incarnate Christ or a physical God being who came to wrestle with him, and it's going to come out. But Jacob is wrestling with God. Whoops. And when the man saw that he would not win the match, so he's wrestling with God all night long. When he saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip, and it wrenched out of its socket. So Jacob's wrestling with God through the night, and he's saying, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. He's staying at this place, this plate of connection with God, saying, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And suddenly, God reaches down and he just touches Jacob's hip, and it comes out of socket, and suddenly he's in severe pain, but he's still hanging on to God and saying, I'm not going to let you go. But the thing that Jacob was finding out there is the thing that we all need to find out. Let's read this out loud. The path to God's power and God's purpose is found in our brokenness. This is why so few of us live this home run life. This is why so few of us live a life that's completely connected to God, is because it's really tough. We don't like to be broken. And I can tell you, you can either be broken and have it be God that does it, or have life that does it, or you can be broken yourself. And you can train yourself to say, you know what, I'm messing up here, and I'm messing up here, and I'm messing up here. God, help me to connect with you so that I can win in character, so that I can help others see you and know you. And then the man said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And then God says to Jacob, what's your name? Do you think God's hanging on to Jacob and don't know his name? You know, when I was a kid and I would go sit on Santa's lap, I used to wonder, if you see me when I'm sleeping and you know when I'm awake, why is it that you need to ask me my name? God knew Jacob's name. God knew exactly who Jacob was, and he knew his name. But the last time that someone asked him his name, he said, my name is Esau. He was lying to his daddy, trying to trick his daddy into giving his brother's inheritance to him. But this time, God's meeting him at that place and saying, what's your name? But what he was really looking for was confession. God, I'm a trickster. God, I'm a trickster. I've been tricking people my whole life. I've been cutting corners my whole life. I've been trying to skip bases my whole life. But I'm here, and I'm with you now, and I really want to make a connection. I want to make a change. Can you make me somebody new? It's at that place of brokenness we find God. We find that real, full, home run life. Because the name of Jacob means trickster. We're all tricksters. Let's read this again. And the only way to live a full life is to be real with yourself, be real with God, then live connected and stay connected to God. And God says to Jacob, your name will no longer be Jacob. The man told him, from now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and won. The path to God's power and God's purpose is found in our brokenness. None of us really want to go there. A few years ago, there was a song by this group called Sidewalk Prophets. And it opens with a line that says, make me broken. And it's one of those songs that I absolutely loved, but I want to change the radio station every single time it comes on. It's because I didn't want to pray this prayer. But if the only way to get God's power and God's purpose in our lives is through brokenness, why would we pray anything else? So as the team comes up, we're going to sing that song as our ushers are passing out communion. And we will receive communion together. And my prayer is that as we find our brokenness, that we will find a home run life.